Thank you all for joining us for the Resume or CV, How to Create Them and When to Use Them workshop. Joining us today are Nicole Thomas, graduate student, graduate research assistant, and GPSA secretary. Amy Porcio, Director of Learning and Talent Development at Scientific Games. Joseph Protopapa, Director of Career and Professional Development at the Business School. And Jessica Soria, graduate student and graduate research assistant. So we're going to begin today's workshop with a brief presentation outlining the basics of resumes and CVs, and then we will begin our panel discussion in which we invite our participants to ask our panel any questions they may have about CVs and resumes. So I'm going to hand it over to Jessica to share her screen and get us started. Thank you.
Hi, Nevada. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Let me share my screen. Give me one moment.
Do you need me to share, Jess?
Yeah, will you share my, it's being slow. Thank you.
Can you see it?
Perfect. Thanks so much. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jessica Soria, and we're going to be discussing CVs versus resumes. What are the similarities, the differences, and when should we use each of them? Because they are different and more specifically meant to be used for different types of jobs that we're applying for. So my name is Jessica Soria. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently a PhD student in the Department of Teaching and Learning. So why am I talking to you guys about resumes and CVs? Well, I have quite a bit of experience creating and evaluating both curriculum vitas and resumes for myself, because I have had jobs where required one or the other, but more importantly, evaluating them and helping other students like yourself, both undergrad and graduate students from all over the world. As a foreign Fulbright placement officer, I was helping graduate students, again, from all over the world, apply to different graduate programs, which required either a CV or a resume. And then also during my time with the UNLV Honors College, I was a success coach, specifically helping juniors and seniors looking to apply to graduate school and or their first professional job. So I have quite a bit of experience evaluating and looking over resumes. So let's dive in. Let's look at the usage of each term around the world. Sometimes they are used interchangeably, meaning they're the same thing. And this is most commonly seen in South Africa, in India, and in Australia. They're in essence resumes, but they use both terms. CVs are then preferred mostly throughout Europe, and there are certain countries where only CVs are used, namely the United Kingdom, Ireland, and New Zealand. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to discuss where resumes are most common in the US, in Canada, and in China, but where we do use CVs, not across the board, but for very specific jobs. So let's look at first the Curriculum Vitae. Now, a CV, which literally means course of life in Latin, is an in-depth document that can be laid out over 2 or more pages. And this is very specific. This is going to be a key area that I want us to focus on. It contains a high level of detail about your achievements, a great deal more than just a career biography. The CV covers your education as well as all other accomplishments like publications, awards, honors, etc. Now, a CV is used most notably in professional academic settings. So for those of us who are masters looking to go on to get our PhD, and even the looking at the professor route, a CV is something that you want to start creating as of now, and it's going to grow into a much larger document. This is typically ordered in chronological order of your entire career. It lists your credentials. And it's used not only if you're looking for a career in academia or the professor route, but when you're seeking funding. So it's really important to highlight all of your teaching experience, your research opportunities, any scholarships or fellowships that were previously awarded, and even our graduate assistantships and postdoctoral positions. A CV is ultimately really looking to highlight your scholarly experience in your field, and your growing career in that subject field. So organizing your curriculum Vita or Vitae, the section order is based on what's most important to your audience. So if you are looking for a teaching position, or if you're looking for a graduate research position, or if you're looking for funding, then you want to highlight what most speaks to what you're applying to. So CV is going to be sectioned off all chronologically, but you're going to have sections on your research, on your publications, on your teaching experience. This is really your preference. Some folks like to use reverse chronological order, or you just use it from most current position to later positions. When you're organizing your CV, it's best to use bullet points and shorter sentences. So you don't want long like paragraphs or even an objective area that's most commonly seen in a resume. We suggest maximum of 2 fonts and 3 text sizes, and that's really just to stress certain areas. So maybe you're going to have the larger text size bolded and underlined for each of your sections, and then italicizing maybe the course that you taught, or the title of the scholarship or funding that you received. So these are things that you want to make sure you include on your CV. Your full name, education, your contact information, a professional email address, and then as I previously mentioned, when you're using those different fonts, section headers. Because CVs do tend to run significantly longer, I mean, when you are later in your career, you are looking at like 20-page CVs. This is something that's very, very different, as you'll see, from the resume. You definitely want to bold name specifically the journal that your publication is in, include any relevant coursework, relevant work experience, also professional presentations when you either have a poster presentation at a conference or a workshop that you're leading at a conference. Something that isn't on here, but for those of you that may be interested in teaching abroad or doing research abroad, what you will see in CVs, at least in Europe, are photos. That is something that's very standard and a big no here stateside, right? What else do we want to make sure that we're including in our CV? Volunteer experience, community service, professional membership. So if you're part of a professional association, or even a scholarly association, any certifications and licensures, teaching and mentoring that you've done. So not just courses, but maybe if you've mentored groups of students. For example, I know here at the Grad Academy, we have an Advantage program. So if you were an Advantage mentor, and any other leadership positions that you've held. What are things that we do not want to include in our CV? And again, this is now going to be something that really differs from a resume, because sometimes in a resume, we might see hobbies. We might see not professional email address, your personal email address, right? Another thing that is a little bit more common now is folks including, if it's relevant, right, their social media accounts. All of these, because a CV is really tailored to your entire um, academic, research, career, the whole picture, these things really don't have a place in a CV. You also don't want to include your full references. Any activities from high school typically are not necessary unless they're explicitly relevant. But because the CV is already so large in and of itself, there's really not a place and not really appropriate for any mention of high school activities. Again, because it's also such a very large text already, or a large document, we don't want to group large masses of text, right? Those bullet points, one sentence, even if it has to be a fragment to describe the course that you taught or just the title of the course. A CV also doesn't typically include a mission statement or an objective. And obviously, this goes without saying, we should not be including any inaccuracies or lies in our CV. So next, the resume. I've started to touch a little bit on some things about the resume, highlighting especially the differences of a resume to the CV. But by definition, a resume is a highly customizable, concise document tailored to the specific job post. Because this does not need to cover your whole career, it's typically not longer than a page or two. And this is because the intended reader will not dwell on your document for very long. The goal of a resume is ultimately to be a highlight and to make you, as the individual applicant, stand out from the competition. So I want to focus on these words. It's highly customizable. And I did address that in the cover, in the CV, right? We would customize what would be the first section, but not necessarily the entire document, because the entire document is a live document that grows. The resume, it isn't a document that just grows. It's tailored to whatever job you're applying for, and you're only going to include information that's relevant to the job that you're applying for. So when is a resume used? Basically, here in the US, outside of academia and higher ed, a resume is used regardless of the field of study. Resume is also used for scholarship applications, internships, and even graduate school applications. Again, regardless of whether you are interested in the professor route or academia as a career, a resume is standard now in graduate school applications. So what are common sections in the resume? Your contact information. An objective is not necessarily something that is standard, but we do see it sometimes in resumes, most notably in younger resumes. New folks that don't have as much experience in the specific field that they're interested in applying for. And this is just an opportunity to really share what your goal is. If I want to work for a Fortune 500 company, or I specifically want to work for a company in this area of the states, right? And that lets the company that you're applying for know that you're specifically interested in them, right? So this is an area almost for you when you're young in your career to fill in that space. You also obviously want to include your education, relevant work experience, and I will stress relevant, which we'll unpack in a bit, and also any relevant awards or activities. I will say that the resume, because it does share a little bit more about like activities, and some folks even will share hobbies, it does feel a bit more personal, not as like formal as a CV, but that goes without saying that, or it goes without saying that this isn't just a fun document and the other one is more serious, right? But it does open up an opportunity to share more of your personality a little bit, similar to not similar, but like a cover letter would. So, what counts as relevant work experience? Well, any jobs that you've had, volunteer positions, teaching or research assistantships, internship also counts as relevant work experience, and any activities or leadership positions that involve qualifications that the specific job that you're applying for needs. So I know folks will often, or students that I've worked with will say, "Oh, but that isn't work experience. It was just a volunteering or just an internship." No, it counts as relevant and related work experience. That's ultimately what an internship is, right? Like work experience. So you don't need to section it off and necessarily differentiate. That may come up in an interview or when you're negotiating salary, right? But it does count. So include that. Next, be specific when describing your work experience. So, when I've worked with students, one thing, an activity that I would ask them to do was to look at their job descriptions, and I would ask them to include a number. When you include a number, that's forcing you to be more specific. So, for example, instead of saying, "I recorded daily sales and documents," try, "I recorded $1,000 in daily sales," or "up to," or "I averaged $1,000 in daily sales." Next, another example, instead of "I answered phones," try, "I managed incoming call volume of 25 clients per day." So again, we're seeing that specific number. And let's look at one more. Instead of "I wiped tables," try, "I adhered to state public health codes by sanitizing tables and creating a positive public image for the restaurant, leading to a 5% increase in customer satisfaction." So each of those included a number and was much more specific, even some would say decorated, than the previous examples. So, how do I decide what is relevant? This is another activity that I often ask students to complete. Would be to literally print out, or for those of us that are more mindful of our carbon footprint, you can take a snapshot and then open up in Adobe. But literally circle all of the skills, knowledge, abilities on the job posting that you do hold and that you can refer back to either an internship or some experience, volunteer experience, or a past work experience that really allowed you to cultivate and grow those skills, or your education. What else are we reviewing the job posting for? Identifying requirements that you do not meet but have similar experiences. So connecting the dots and marrying transferable skills. So it may not seem explicitly apparent, but you have to make those connections for um, the the person HR who you're submitting your app to. What else? We want to identify. Thank you. We want to identify your strongest matches and tailor those to the description. So, as I previously mentioned, we're circling skills, knowledge, and abilities that we definitely meet and that we can link back to specific stories or past positions. But then we also want to, after that, address ones that we don't necessarily clearly meet. But the ones that you want to talk about first and foremost and really highlight are your strongest matches and the um, the well, I'm having a brain fart, y'all. The portions of the role and responsibilities that are highlighted as like most needed. Um, and yeah, in the interview, you can elaborate more on experiences that aren't necessarily explicitly seen. So, building your resume, a couple of tips for success. 80% of the language on your resume should match the position description of the job that you're applying for. So that's why this previous activity that I just went over is really necessary. You want to use the language that they're using, and really make those connections so that there's no question and no doubt that you are an ideal candidate and that you do meet the requirements. So it's not just about making sense to you and that you see it. You want to make sure that they see it. You want to organize your headings and sections strategically. So thinking back to what you want to highlight first are your strongest points. You want to cut the fluff and give yourself enough time to write and edit descriptions. And finally, just some tips and resources overall for both CV and resume. Have a mentor or a colleague proofread your resume and be open to honest feedback and critiques. This feedback and critiques are only going to make your resume, your CV, that much stronger. Be specific, clear, and confident, but there's a very fine line. We don't want to brag either or come off as boastful. But confidence is key and can be transmitted in both your CV and your resume. And be sure, ultimately, regardless if it's a resume that's going to be very tailored and only include experiences that speak to the position, your CV also, the order that you put the different sections in should be ordered in a way that's really speaking to the position that you're applying for. And finally, this is something that we'll link in the chat, but the UNLV Career Center has a career toolkit that's super helpful, and I really encourage everyone to check it out. But also to meet with a career coach. I mentioned previously I was an academic success coach working with honors college students, but the Career Center has specific career coaches tailored to supporting you and helping you really create a strong resume, start building your live CV, and even help you prepare for interviews. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. All right, so what we're going to do now is open it up to questions for our panel. Please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat. If you would like to, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or if you want it to remain anonymous, just directly chat me. All right, so we have a question in the chat. How do you go about writing a resume if you do not have the right work experiences or education, but you believe that you would do well in that position? Who would like to get us started on that?
I'll go ahead and jump in. So just so this group knows, I don't have a background in academic CVs. So my background is very much in the resume side of things. I've been in human resources for over 15 years. And so a lot of that is grabbing, looking, sourcing resumes. And so there's a couple of things if you've got a resume, or if you don't necessarily have the equivalent work experience to keep in mind. Number one, the things that Jessica talked about, which was really identifying, even if it's not a direct correlation, where might their similarities be is really important. The other thing is to identify and understand some jobs have absolute minimum criteria. So are we talking about you don't meet the minimum criteria? Because if you don't meet the minimum criteria, the HR systems won't pass you on to the hiring manager. So is it a preference or is it a requirement? And being able to identify that is going to be in the language of the job posting. So for example, if it says 5 years required, you can give it a shot, but chances are if it's a larger company that has an HR system, if you only have 2.5 years, the system will filter you out. If it's 5 years preferred or 5 years or equivalent work experience, absolutely tailor that resume to make those connections where it may not be as obvious.
Thanks, Amy. Joe, did you want to add anything?
No, not really. I think that Amy covered it pretty well. I think the first thing that popped into my head, though, is sometimes there are skills or qualifications that you don't meet, and if they're required. So, for example, if it requires someone who can who can code, and you you can't do that, or there are certain technical competencies that you have to have, and you don't have those. Usually that you're not going to get by, even if you think you'd be good in the position, there are some things that are more concrete than others, and so you just have to be careful of that as well.
Thank you. And Nicole, did you want to add anything?
No, I mostly cover CVs, so that's my wheelhouse.
Perfect.
So I've learned a lot today too.
All right, let's see. So our next question that I just got here is it ever necessary to have both a CV and a resume?
So I can actually hit on this one. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm a current graduate student, but my previous experience was reviewing CVs in the Office of Undergraduate Research. Yes, 100%. It's so necessary to have both. If you're planning on even just staying in academia, your CV is essential for communicating your research, your academic experience, your leadership experience. But if you're even moving outside of that world or applying for a job, a resume is very, very useful. So what I normally do is I have my CV and I constantly update my CV, but then I keep a running document for my resume, and whatever jobs I'm interested in applying for, I can take the specific experiences on my CV and move that over to the resume. So you'll have a lot of the same information on both, but there might be some skills that completely fall into work-related experiences and research academics. So I always have both on hand and try to constantly update both.
Great, thank you, Nicole. So our next question is, what are common mistakes people make when putting together their resume or CV?
I'll start and imagine that we'll just kind of tumble through. Spelling, and please, please, please get your own email address correctly. I can't tell you how many times we get bounce backs of people not inputting their own data correctly. So spelling is one, but probably more importantly is getting your own contact information accurate. I know it sounds ridiculous and happens more than you know.
So I think in general, formatting is an issue. So formatting and grammar and consistency. I know that's a lot to unpack. So making sure that as Amy said, spelling everything correctly, but then making sure that your formatting is correct. So if you have 3 jobs listed and you're bolding the position title for your job, for the job you held with that organization, make sure that you bold all three so that there's some consistency. Also, grammar is extremely important. Make sure that your grammar is right on, is top notch. One thing that's kind of a hidden, something that people are challenged with, and Jessica kind of touched on this during her presentation, is focusing on results or outcomes when you're talking about your jobs or your experiences that you've had. So I think Jessica used one of the examples of, I answered phones, but really, if you can explain call volume and kind of quantify that for the reader, it's really important. So a lot of times when a student gets everything right on a resume in terms of spelling, grammar, contact information, format, it's like, yes, you're off to a really good start. And then you get to the experience section and you read, and it reads like a list of tasks or duties that you've done, when really it doesn't tell how well you've done it, what the results and outcomes were. And that's really what an employer wants to know. I mean, answering a phone is great. I mean, I answered my phone this morning when the plumber called, but like, what if I had the plumber call? What if I was a general contractor and I had the plumber and the electrician, and all of a sudden that takes some skill to be able to handle calls in that way. So, you know, I think that that's one hidden thing that people are challenged with is results and outcomes in that experience section.
I also want to add on, agreed with everything that the panelists said, but also formatting in terms of making sure that it's a format that like computers can read. So like saving it as a PDF and then uploading it is usually useful, because I've noticed that I have like tables or things like that that look completely fine in a Word document, but then when I save it as a PDF, prior to uploading it, things look kind of wonky. So just making sure that that is consistent. Um, I also use templates. Like if you like, I've looked up like CV templates, and they have great ones online. You can look up in terms of like professors that you admire, and looking at their CVs and then like copying that. So that usually helps me with like knowing that my formatting is right without like having someone check it prior to submitting it. Um, so yeah, all of those things are common issues.
Yeah, I would even add one more part, which I mean, it's going back a little bit to what I mentioned in the presentation, but um, I didn't mention formatting, so thank you for y'all including that, or not. I didn't mention explicitly, but a common mistake: not tailoring either your CV, the order, right, of what you want to highlight, or your resume specifically to the job that you're applying for. Sometimes we'll see resumes that look a little bit more like CVs, that they've just thrown everything in the kitchen sink to us. But remember, a resume is supposed to be more of a snapshot of relevant keyword work experience to the position that you're applying for. It's not a whole preview of your entire career. So that's a not as detailed mistake, but still a huge mistake, nonetheless, especially when we know that resumes are going to be glanced at quickly. And if they don't see it off the bat, your resume may not be pulled forward. Or if the machine, doesn't catch it, your resume may not be pulled forward. So it needs to be very explicit how your past experiences relate. So common mistake, not tailoring and just submitting whatever version of your resume that you have and not updating.
Thank you all. So our next question here is, can we include a separate section on skills in the resume?
I think so. I'll just jump in. Absolutely, you can include specific skills. I think it ties into if it's relevant, right? Like, I don't care if you are a downhill skier and you're applying for a role in sales. Like, that could be an interesting fact, but it's not necessarily relevant. So, if it's a skill that ties to the role, to the position, to growth capabilities, most definitely. If it's just if it's an interesting fact about you, please leave that off.
I would also add that when I used to meet with students, a lot of times they wouldn't consider the skills that they learned in class actual skills. Those are indeed skills. So say, for example, you take a class on statistical analysis. Okay, you have the skill of statistical analysis. Like, think about like evaluation, conflict management, all of these things like interpersonal skills. So all of these things that you learn in terms of like doing group work or working on projects for your courses, those are transferable skills that you could definitely include as well, if they're relevant to the job. So a lot of times students are like, oh my gosh, like I actually don't have any, they're like, I don't know how to code. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine, like statistical analysis or something like that. So just finding those skills that set you apart, because a lot of times you're not able to like submit your transcript. So whatever places you're applying don't really know what courses you've taken and those experiences that you have. And I think a lot of students kind of just put that to the back of their brains and are like, hey, I have a degree. But a lot of things that you learn in your degree are transferable skills.
Thank you. So to kind of follow up on the common mistakes we just discussed, what are the most important parts to a resume and CV that in a quick look over by the reviewer, it would immediately make or break that application?
I would say it depends on the job that you're applying to. So I think what's going to draw the reader's eyes into your resume is the relevant information based on the job. So if it requires a degree in computer science, well, then it's extremely important that your degree in computer science is listed somewhere towards the top of your resume so that they can see that quickly. So putting your education section at the top. I think it depends on the position.
Yeah, I think to build on that, and we've heard about it a little bit differently, yet I want to say it out loud really, really explicitly, is understand how that resume, how your information is going to get to the hiring manager. And what I mean by that is it going through somebody in the HR recruitment team? Is there that human filter? Is it being pulled in through a system? And is that company engaging in something called resume masking or blind resumes, right? And if you're not familiar with resume masking, what that is it it takes the system takes your resume, pulls out all of your identifiable data, and just gives the hiring manager essentially bullet points about your skill sets. And so, if that's the case, one of the things that's critical is what we heard from Jessica, which is tailoring your resume to have terms from the job description in your descriptions, because that's going to be, if the first contact with a person is filtered through a filtering system, it's got to have that direct correlation. So understanding, is my resume going through a person? Is it going through HR? Is it going directly to the hiring manager? How is it going to get there? And then you can tailor more specifically to that outcome.
And just to kind of follow up on that, how would we know if it's being pulled through a system or reviewed by a person? Is it appropriate for us to ask that?
So it depends. I would say that everyone's favorite answer, it depends. Generally, if you are submitting a resume through an applicant tracking system, so a Workday, a PeopleSoft, there's a gajillion of them, and now I can only think of two. Yet, if you're submitting an application through a formal system where you can upload it, you can log in and out to check the status of your application, you generally know that that's a more sophisticated approach. And chances are, one of two things will happen. It'll either go through a recruiter and the recruiter will filter out and push forward to hiring managers, or hiring managers can see everybody that's applied, which can be a lot of people, right? So sometimes it's 3 applications. More often than not, it's somewhere between 50 and 150 applications that come through. So if you're in a system, chances are there's filtering capabilities. If you are working with a recruiter, so you're having a conversation with an actual human, by all means, ask the question. Generally, recruiters are there to be there and help you through that process.
Thank you so much. So our next question here in the chat is, besides using current professionals in your field for examples for a CV or resume, what other resources are there for us to utilize?
So if I'm to understand the question correctly, it's if I want to create a resume or CV, other than examples from people I know, what other resources are out there? Is that the question? Okay. So I can I can speak to Lee Business School in our office, career and professional development within Lee Business School. We have sample resumes based on your major. So there are 5 academic departments, and we have so we have a sample resume for each department, because an accounting resume is different in some ways than a marketing resume. So we have samples within, on our website, and if you reach out to one of us, we can help you identify additional samples if you'd like. We also have them for our grad students, so MBAs. I worked specifically solely with MBAs for 4 years prior to coming to UNLV. So I have a robust, not database, but I have several samples of resumes for MBAs or for master's students in the business area that could be of help as well. So, and I know that UNLV Career Services has some in the career toolkit, has some helpful information. It's not always a good idea to just Google and find something you like. It's always better, I think, if you have an opportunity to reach out for help, because the university has resources available, that you take advantage of those.
Yeah, and I saw it. Thank you, Nevina, for adding that to the chat as well. The Career Services website, actually underneath, well, for undergraduates, you can go to the Office of Undergraduate Research or Career Services. But for graduate students, they specifically have graduate advising. Well, they'll meet with you one-on-one to help you develop all of your professional documents. So that was actually really helpful for both a CV and a resume. But if you're like looking for like a baseline template or anything like that, they should also be able to provide you with that. And if you want like an example of like a grad one, I would also be more than happy to share mine. A lot of times when you just like ask people, they're like, hey, like, can you share your CV? A lot of people are happy to. So you can definitely make an appointment with Career Services though, and they'll walk you through the entire document formatting and creation process. They're really good over there as well.
Thank you both. And just to add on, yeah, Career Services is really great. They have a lot of really good resources on whether they meet with you on one-on-one, or if you just want to use their career toolkit to find samples. And thanks for offering that, Nicole. Maybe I can share that with the group in our follow-up email to them so they have an example. Alrighty, so our next question here is, if I am interested in a admin staff position in higher ed, should I use a CV or a resume? I'm not sure if anyone has had experience with that.
So could I ask a question for clarification? When you say admin staff, do you mean administrative faculty?
Yeah, like an administrative, like leadership position. Yeah, faculty.
So that's my role, and I have a CV. I've had a CV for like 15 years, and I think it's pretty common. Although, so the way it may differ, so I would say yes to that question, because that's what I use. And I've served on many search committees and led search committees for academic faculty in the past, and it's not uncommon for there to be CVs that are submitted rather than resumes. And so for administrative types of positions, what you find on a resume is or on a CV is maybe a little bit different from what you see on an academic faculty resume, because what we do is different. So I've presented at a lot of conferences, and so that information's on my CV. And I belong to and have held officer positions in some professional organizations. And so that information is on my CV. And so that goes much deeper than a resume, and goes to and speaks more about my experience in higher ed that I've had over the last 15 years. So CV for an administrative faculty position or administrative position, yes.
Great, thank you. So for those of us looking to apply for a job within the industry, is there a maximum number of pages we should keep our resume linked at? Will it be to our disadvantage to have a multiple page resume? And maybe Amy can get us started on this one.
Be careful. This one's a pet peeve of mine. Um, yes, there is a maximum, and it depends on, I will say, once again, my favorite, it depends. Years of experience. In general, 2 pages is like max. Anything more than that, and I'll just have a really a really frank moment with this group. I've worked with many hiring managers who have received resumes, and they've called me and they've been like, I can't hire this person. They sent me an 8-page resume. They don't know how to communicate in a consolidated way. So they're out, right? So in some cases, I've had hiring managers that have received actual CVs and been like, they don't understand our industry. And so we can't even consider them. So having said that, if you are perhaps less work experience, 1-page resume is absolutely appropriate. If you are more seniored in your career, 2 pages is absolutely great. When you get into the 3, the 4, the 10 pages, that's not actually a CV, that's like 10 page of resume, it actually can be really off-putting to the hiring manager. So things to be aware of. It does cause it causes emotional reactions for some people, and it's mostly because it's around, are they able to communicate clearly? Are they going to be able to perform at a speed and efficiency in which I need? And if they can't communicate, in 2 pages or less, what does that mean about the work product that they're going to be able to create for us? So that's been my experience in terms of length. I've got some senior level people that can get away with 3 pages, but even then, at that level, if you're that senior within an organization, chances are the resume is less important.
And I would actually like to add to that really quick in terms of tailoring. So that's why tailoring your resume is so essential, because what I've seen from students before is that like there would be something like, oh, I worked at Abercrombie and Fitch back in 2008. And I'm like, okay, like if you're applying for a sales position, like specifically for something like that, then that would work. But if you're applying for something that's completely unrelated to that and that's something that you did in high school, you can leave it off. Like your experience will always be relevant and worthwhile in your job, like no matter what experience you have, but you don't necessarily have to put all of that on your resume, because frankly, the people who are hiring might not even care about that information. They're looking for someone who's going to be good at that job. And while you have skills and hobbies outside of that, that's totally awesome and very important. But you don't necessarily need to bring that to the hiring manager.
Thank you. So we have a follow-up question to that. How do I decide what to cut? Sometimes if we have too much information that we think is relevant, want to include, what are some tips or tricks to help us decide what should not be included?
I'm going to actually give a shout out again to Jessica and her presentation, which is the mapping, right? So if you have the job description and it'll have skills, it'll have expectations of the role, if you can map it across and there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't map, uh, that's where I would start. It doesn't mean that you can't have it, but that's a good place to start. Skill sets or experiences that don't map to the job description, and then work on consolidation of language is, I think, another good place to start. If you really want to keep something in and it requires a paragraph explanation, really work on that language, just to wrap it more tightly is where I would start. And then always phone a friend. I think we talked about that too. Have somebody else look at it for you to make sure that it makes sense to somebody who doesn't know what that experience meant to you. Sometimes it meant a lot to us, but it may not be as relevant for others that aren't part of that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one thing I would add is usually when you look at a job description, at least this is my experience, when you look at a job description, the organization that has posted that job is going to typically put the most important stuff first. they're not going to put stuff at the, bury it deep down at the end of the job description that, oh, by the way, you have to have these 5 important things. So if everything on your resume is relevant to the job description and you're like, what can I cut because I'm still over a page? Look at the job description and say, what are the most important things that they're asking for? Let's start at the top. They're asking for A, B, C, and maybe there's a list of like 20 things. But as you get down through that list or through the job description, typically it goes from most important to less, and until you get from required to preferred skills or required to preferred experience. And so take what's super, super relevant in the job description and apply that to how you're going to kind of slice and dice your information if you have too much that's all relevant. But I also agree that having someone look at it, they may tell you, hey, look, this isn't as relevant as you think. Even though it's relevant to you, it may not be as relevant to the job or to the organization that's posting the job.
Thank you. So we got another question in the chat, and it is, I was pursuing a PhD degree, but did not finish it and transferred to another grad program. How should I mention this in my CV?
So honestly, you can put the years that you were at that program. So say like 2013 to 2017, Louisiana State University, and then 2017 to present, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. You don't necessarily have to explain it on your CV. If they have questions about it, they will ask you about it in the interview. And that's when you're able to just be upfront and say, oh yeah, I actually transferred due to these reasons, or oh, I'm now finishing this experience here. That's a totally normal thing. A lot of people have times where they transfer or change programs or anything like that. So just as long as you keep it up to date and you're able to kind of explain those gaps, you should be totally fine.
I've also seen, just to piggyback a little bit, I've also seen the university, the years, and maybe even the number of units completed. If they want to highlight, maybe you were at a little bit more of a prestigious university and then you had to transfer, or vice versa, right? Some students like to highlight that, and I have seen that as well, the units completed.
Great, thank you. So we have just a few more minutes today, but as we get closer to the end of our time together, I just wanted to open it up to the panel if they wanted to provide any last minute advice or tips that maybe we didn't cover today.
Yes, I have one that I would love to share. This helped me tremendously throughout my graduate career. Writing down the things that you do as you do them. So a lot of times, like we get invited to talks, we apply for things, we get scholarships, we take a new class. Writing those things down and keeping up to date with it, even if it's just like, I literally have like a list of sticky notes where I'm like, oh, this is something to add to my CV when I update my CV. This is something to add to my resume if I'm updating my resume. Because what you don't want to happen is like 2 nights before the job is due, or the application is due, you're sitting there and you're like, what did I do 2 years ago? What was I working on? I know I got invited to something. So just keeping track of that and kind of updating it, whether that's, once every few months or things like that. I know with pandemic, it's been kind of hard. Like I just looked at mine and I was like, I have a 2019 copy and then like March, so I'm like, there was a gap. Like, but just updating it, being on top of it, it'll save you later.
Yeah, I would agree completely with Nicole. I have that same sticky note for the CV version because I have both. I've worked in higher ed and outside of higher ed, but yeah, that sticky note. Whenever you maybe attend, even you attending a workshop that may be relevant to a job that you're eyeing, adding that on, especially for a CV. And that's why I referred to a CV more of as a live document, because it doesn't end, whereas a resume may it has an end, right? Like when you submit the job application. But a CV definitely for those folks that are looking at more the route in academia, whether administrative faculty or academic faculty, updating your CV monthly, even maybe, right? Setting a Google reminder.
So I have a couple comments, but I think there was a question regarding, oh, and Nicole answered it. So yes, about nominations. So the one thing that I would say is there seems to be this idea that you have to apply to a lot of jobs to get some hits, right? And my experience has always been that if you say, boy, I need to apply to 10 jobs a week, or I need to apply to this many jobs a month because I need to find a job, I need to be employed when I graduate. That's the wrong way to go about it, because I don't think that the quality of those applications and the quality of the resume and other career documents that you submit to those jobs is going to be as high as if you were a little more selective. I honestly feel like you will do better if you just focus on the jobs that really resonate with you and you have an interest in, because I know that there have been times where I've been like, oh, here's a job at a university I really want to work at. And then I read the job description. I'm like, that's not really my thing. Like, I'm not really into that, but I would really love to work at that university. And it's like, so if I were to apply to that, I'd probably just throw something together and just, kind of get it out there. Or when I was graduating from grad school, I was like throwing, and it's like, I don't want to move to South Dakota, but they have a really great job opening, and it's like, just be, you know, be honest with yourself, be true to yourself. And if you read a job and you're like, I am really interested in that, then go for it, right? Apply and do everything you need to do. But at the same time, I think that if you have a genuine interest, your career documents are going to be in much better shape than if you were just splattering things all over the place.
Yeah, and I'll kind of wrap us up and say one of the things that I think is really important from a professional perspective, and I don't know academics, so it may not be as important. Yet making sure that your resume is consistent with whatever is in LinkedIn or whatever social media profiles that you have. There is nothing worse that when a hiring manager gets a really interesting resume and they look people up, right? Because it's there. And then you see a LinkedIn that isn't consistent, or there is some different gaps that exist. So it calls into question integrity and some other values of the applicant. So make sure that whatever you put in there's consistency in that personal brand that you're putting forward to the organization.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you all so much for sharing your time with us and answering all these questions. This was super beneficial and valuable to everyone. And thanks to our participants for joining us, especially during your spring break. That shows even more dedication. So before you all log off, please take just a couple of minutes to fill out this workshop feedback survey that we are pasting right now. It really means a lot to us and helps us improve the workshops that we continue to provide you every semester. So if you all don't mind doing that before you log off, we would appreciate it. But I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all so much for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.